Thank you, Dr. Young M. As you were playing, I felt that your music blended so harmoniously with the scene I see outside the window to my left, with its softness and gentleness, and I thank you for it. I thank Mignon for our music and those musical introductions. Lynn for being present with us as lay leader. And I thank Emily from the bottom of my heart for her generosity of spirit and her abundant giving to the work of Worship Chair, and to all those who help her. I thank you. I'd like to light our chalice flame this morning using the words of Reverend Bruce Southworth, who wrote, "For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May its many sparks be in us and meet and merge in this our community of heart and soul." Today I was going to continue to talk about an emergent point of view that arises from the scientific community and merges with elements and movements in our religious world, and is captured in the term that is sometimes talked about as naturalism or religious naturalism. And I'd like to read from a book entitled "What is Ecological Civilization?" written by Philip Clayton and Andrew Schwartz. And that book helps us become ever more aware of our deeper connections with nature, and helps inspire, I think, a reverence for life and for the nature that is within us and around us. They wrote, "May we remember that we would not exist at all without the stable and nurturing life systems around us. In fact, in one sense, we are not separately existing creatures at all, at no point in our lives. We are, in fact, from the bottom up, beings in community, a personal and a natural community. We are, from our simplest cell to our highest thought, the organic expressions of ecosystems that nourish us and give us life each moment." Emily, thank you for those beautiful words. And they express so clearly the spirit of what I wanted to talk about in this series about religious naturalism. There are some ancient traditions, and Native American traditions are one such great example, of peoples who had a reverence for the earth and a sense of closeness with nature that allowed them to channel their natural feelings of reverence towards what was real and immediate and rooted in nature. So again, thank you, Emily. Our culture and our society is very divided. It's divided politically, as we all see every day if we view the news. There are many people who attempt to divide people on the basis of race or skin color or other perceptions of value. And there's quite a large segment of society that acts as though we are not rooted in nature and that we are free to treat nature in any way we so choose. And all of these are various forms of disharmony and conflict. And what is needed in our society is communities that can help bring people together. And not on a superficial level, but to bring people together on the basis of something that's deep and true and real. I believe Unitarian Universalists have a fantastic opportunity to tap into Native American traditions and other traditions that have been involved in the awareness of the importance of nature, and to tap into what science has told us over the last 60 years, to create a great story that will help us define what is really real, what is really true, and what is really important. When a person enters a Catholic church or a Jewish synagogue or a Protestant church, they're entering an institution that at its basis, at its foundation, has a great story that illuminates what that group of people say is true and real and important. And I think Unitarian Universalists similarly need a great story to help us identify to ourselves and to the larger world who we are and what we believe to be important. We sometimes say that our principles unite us, and that is true, but principles are abstract and they don't have the emotive power and certainly the great power of a great story. We say things like our diversity unites us, but diversity, while great and very important, is not something that unites people. We say we believe in anti-racism work and all kinds of social justice work, but what are the deeper roots of why we stand for and stand with those great causes? On a daily basis, the unity found in most Unitarian Universalist congregations is found in the common feeling of humanity, in the experience of love and compassion and generosity felt and given and exchanged. And that creates an important bond that is real and vital to who we are. But yet, that alone, as strong and as important as it is, does not make for a strong basis. To appeal to a wider spectrum of people, as we must, to stop being a small and really tiny religious movement, to appeal to a wider spectrum of humanity, to give the world a sense of our identity, both for ourselves internally and externally. We need to be grounded in a great story that reminds us, in a way based on reality and not fantasy, of what is really real and what is really important. We need to be able to tell this story with confidence and certainty, insofar as a human can be confident and certain. Many religions have responded to the myriad changes and the rapid changes of our modern age by becoming defensive, by retreating, by becoming antagonistic, by becoming more inward-looking, by becoming more fundamentalist, more rigid, more dogmatic. Other people have responded to the rapidity of modernity and its trends by saying all religions are really some form of illusion, and the sooner we are done with them, the better. There's a large number of people who wander in the middle between these two extremes. Many Unitarian Universalists, of course, are rebels and skeptics and rejectors of traditional religion. But what is lost on most rebels and skeptics is not understanding, not perceiving, not taking in that the great religious traditions of the world have been ways in which human beings have met their deepest needs. And predominantly, the two great needs of the quest for wholeness, the quest for integrity, the quest to be a person, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the quest to live harmoniously with others. Human beings require some kind of guidance in their pursuit of wholeness, of a life of integrity, of being a person living on the basis of principle and not whim and emotion. And at the same time, human beings need guidance regarding how to get along with others, how to live harmoniously with other human beings and with all of nature. These two needs, to be a self and to be a self with others, will never be eradicated from the human condition, even though religious credibility goes lower and lower, and the resources that have guided human beings in their quest for personal wholeness and in their quest for social cohesion go down. We have found, you use, a unity based on our common humanity and our love for one another. And that is important. And perhaps we're also, to some degree, unified around social justice issues, although that is not always true. And of course, we have the two standbys, Robert Rules of Order and the coffee hour, about which we can all agree, mostly. That is our glue. However, the need for a grand narrative still stands, which, like the biblical narrative of old, can define and embrace us all. In 1976, historian Merlin Stone wrote a book entitled When God Was a Woman, and she traced the worship of a goddess back to the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. These feminine-centered religions were much more aligned with the earth, with nature, and with its rhythms than the male-centered religions that have dominated European culture for centuries. The book that she wrote, and others like it, pointed to the fact that at one time religion had been balanced with nature, and that what we experience in the West now is the dominant forms of religion are out of touch with the earth, with nature, and even the cosmos itself. In 1980, the astronomer Carl Sagan worked with the public broadcasting system to create Cosmos, a personal voyage. It was the most watched television series ever produced. It has been seen by at least 500 million people across 60 different countries. There is a desire for and a taste for this kind of understanding of life. He, by doing this, advanced the new narrative of the cosmic story to the modern world. During the 1980s, Harvard biologist Edward O. Wilson wrote extensively about what he called the epic of evolution, stating that it can be as inherently noble as any religious epic when it is expressed in a poetic way. Reverend Michael Dowd and the Unitarian Universalist minister, his partner Connie Barlow, for the last 25 years have crisscrossed all over this country, speaking at many, many Unitarian Universalist churches and other religious bodies about the great story as they have learned it. There are dozens of such people who, over the last 30 years, have talked about the importance of this movement. Last week, I spoke about Loyal Rue, and this week I would like to speak about another important figure in this movement, Ursula Goodenough. Ursula's father began life as a United Methodist minister. In the latter part of his career, he became professor of religion, and specifically the history of religion, at Yale. Ursula's father died when she was 22, and this had a tremendous impact on her life. She went on to become a biologist and a professor, but part of her life's work was to merge what she had dedicated her life to, biology, and what her father had dedicated his life to, which was religion. And without diluting the importance and power of science and biology, she sought to merge religion with biology. The following are a few of the key points of her ideas. First of all, she disputes the idea that religion is about answers, and certainly not dogmatic answers. She devoted her life to developing the idea that the religious spirit was about cultivating wonder. And as a biologist, she was eager to point out the very real ways in which life is marvelous and wonderful and evokes our reverence if we but really understand it. She developed what she called a covenant with mystery. Mystery, she wrote, generates wonder, and wonder generates awe. To some, that gap can be terrifying. To others, it can be an emancipation. Again and again, she wanted to show people how life was worthy of wonder and fascinating. And so she wrote, as I look at life, I again and again revert to my covenant with mystery and respond to the emergence of life, not with a search for design or purpose, but instead with an outrageous celebration that it exists at all. A second way in which she sought to merge religion and science was by considering the interconnectedness of life. As a biologist, she was very aware of the deep interconnections of all of life with all other aspects of life. We are embedded, she wrote, in the great evolutionary story of planet Earth, and this means that we are always anything but alone. A third way in which she tried to unify science and religion was by pointing out the uniqueness of human beings. Human beings, she wrote, are a symbolic species. Through our language and our ability to craft and shape language, we're able to envision a world that is beyond the mere physical and the biological, and we're able to peer into the future and conjure up directions we might go. She believes that out of this there comes special qualities of the human, and that among them are self-awareness, empathy, and because of empathy, compassion. And for her, one of the greatest gifts of the human was the ability to have empathy, to be, as it were, at one in fellow feeling with another human being. And she came to understand her own life and the life of others as, in her own phrase, sacred. I have come, she wrote, to understand that the self, myself, is inherently sacred by virtue of its improbability, by virtue of its miraculousness, by virtue of its wondrous emergence. It is sacred. And a fourth way in which she, and the final one I would mention, in which she tries to integrate science and religion, has to do with the grand narrative that can be drawn out of religion and drawn out of the sciences and merged into one. Human beings, she writes, need stories, grand, compelling stories that help orient us in our lives and in this cosmos. The epic of evolution is such a story, beautifully situated and suited to anchor our search for consensus as human beings, telling us of our nature, our place, the context in which we live. And moreover, response to this story can yield a deep and abiding sense of spiritual experience. And then, in addition to that great story, we need other stories as well, human-centered stories that embodies our ideals and our passion. This mythos comes to us often in experiences called revelation from the sages and the artists of the past and present times. I believe that we're living in a time in which we're seeing the death of old traditional forms of religion. I believe we're living in a time in which change is so momentous and so rapid that it shocks us and disorients us and subjects us to be susceptible to being polarized and susceptible to forgetting that we are part of one great system of life which embraces us all and upon which we are, each of us, utterly and completely dependent. As a religious movement, we have been on the vanguard of realizing changes in religion and society historically. I think that my remarks each week cannot do much to help advance our understanding of this great movement, but I do hope in sharing a few thoughts that I provide some hints about what is possible as we think about how we might identify ourselves, both internally and to the world. We live in a highly fragmented and polarized society. The presidential election that just concluded, or is trying to conclude, shows us that such polarization will continue. The basis for understanding our unity is readily available and never as more important than now. I look forward to continuing with you on this journey. As I extinguish our chalice, I share with you words from Rudolf Barreau, who wrote, "When an old culture is dying, the new culture is born by a few people who are not afraid to be insecure." Words of benediction today come from Tom Shade, who wrote, "My friends, there is a power at work in the universe. It was not made by human hands, but it may work through human hands. It is a creative, sustaining, and transforming power, and we can trust that power with our lives. It will sustain us whenever we take a stand on the side of love, and whenever we take a stand for peace and justice. May we trust in that power. Together, we are held by that power. Amen.